I would record this, so I will record it. So the goal of spiritual stories is really, I'm trying to provide a template that could be used in other communities. So that's sort of where it is, where people just come together and share and sort of help each other in a spiritual sense. And then you guys are Baha'is, so it's good to help people understand that we're a religion, we're not a cult. We have a very dramatic history that is there. We have a beginning point, no clergy, and its claim is on the people of all faiths. And it's about what God is doing now, which strikes me. There's a lot going on right now.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah. I hope you guys are holding on to your hats, and maybe you can all breathe a little easier after last few days. So good God, what a strange time we're in. But at any rate, okay. So this is redundant here. Okay. And then sometimes it's necessary to, talk about the two plans, the greater plan and the lesser plan of God. And that the Baha'is are really the lesser plan, which simply means that God's activities are really shaping everything. I mean, they're world embracing, they're universal. And we have a tiny but very significant sort of role to play in all this. And so our task is to help others see the plans and join in accomplishing them. So these are the steps that we've been doing. We started, step 1 was why we search for God. Step 2 was the rational proofs of God. Step 3 was the spiritual proofs of the kingdom. Step 4 was our spiritual teachers. And today is step 5 and step 6 is sort of the basic thing. So these, from step 2, 3, and 4, we all have recorded on YouTube. And there was some just fantastic discussions in some of that. So the audience was not large. I don't think we got above 10 people, which is a bit unfortunate. But I did notice that a fair number of people are finding them on YouTube, which is sort of cool. But there was some great discussions that went on. And then pioneering in service and spiritual challenges and making commitments or next steps is sort of our pathway forward. And so here we are. This is the fun time. So again, I'll tell you that I've got lots of things to share, but the goal is not for me to ramble on, which I'm quite capable of doing.
Oh, we love it.
But it's really, we have experience. Each of us has experiences with prayer, with teaching, fasting, perhaps abstinence, and then even because those two things are related, this practices and the confirmations, we can chat about those as much as you like. And then if we get bored or then I have my stories that I can share, and that can go on for 20 minutes or so. But it's up to you. So I'll stop and we can just share stories if you like. So, oh, good. Oh, and Mr. Saba has just joined us, and some more people that I'm seeing here. Is that Fairmars?
Hi,
Yes,
Tom.
Fairmars, I'm so
How
happy
are
to see
you?
you. Oh,
Sorry to be late. And here is
oh,
Gile
Hi.
also.
it's so good to see you guys.
So
Oh,
good to see you.
oh, wow.
Are you
guys
doing well?
Yeah, where are you? Are you in Atlanta?
I'm still in Metro Atlanta, west of Marietta.
Oh.
Never left. I came to Atlanta and they never could get rid of me.
It's a beautiful place. And the guy in my screen, he's upper left corner, but Lloyd and Kaya are also from Atlanta from a long time ago. So I don't know if you ever had a chance to meet them.
I
Don't think so.
Okay.
don't think so.
And
Which community are they in?
now, Lloyd, where are you now? You're in
we're in Arroyo Grande.
Arroyo Grande.
Yeah, the big gulch.
Yeah. And you used to be in Decatur, DeKalb? Is DeKalb? Yeah.
We were in what became Central DeKalb. We were originally south and then north.
Yeah.
And then central.
Yeah. Very good. Fair Mars, isn't it amazing how we've become these people you see before us now?
Absolutely.
I'm trying to figure out who is this old guy that I see? And that's me. I have to tell myself every morning, oh, that's me there. Oh, well, anyway. Oh, and I see Mr. Saba is joining us. And those of you that don't know, he's got a bunch of lectures, stories, really beautiful stories, hours and hours of them on YouTube. And so just you could probably just Google his name and find them on YouTube of his wonderful adventures. Okay, so anyone have a story you want to share?
Well, I have kind of a weird one from Atlanta.
Go for it.
At one time, I applied and got a job working at a health center in the West. Now, anybody that knows about Atlanta, particularly back in the 70s, knows about the West End. Did not have the best reputation.
Yeah.
Even though Atlanta University, which was one of the largest Black dominant universities in America, is there. And in fact, there were many Baha'is in Atlanta that were worried about me because so Karen could keep our car, I would take the bus there. And they worried about this kid going into the bad neighborhood, in Atlanta. But I met up with a gentleman from the place next door, the EEOC, who was a Muslim and sold the Balalian, their newspaper.
Mm.
And eventually, we would ride the bus home together. And we would discuss things like, I come from a Jewish background and I'm a Baha'i, and you're a Muslim, and don't we both have a similar problem with the Christmas holiday season? Trying to find a point of commonality between us. And that led to me taking Arabic lessons at the mosque in South DeKalb for 6 months. Basically, I wanted to learn how to read some of the prayers in Arabic. But the real spiritual story is, having been a Baha'i, and I've been always interested, I know various greetings. So if you can picture somebody and I didn't look much different except the beard was darker, right?
And a little shorter.
Yeah, pulling up to a Black Muslim mosque at 7 o'clock in the morning in the east side, southeast DeKalb County, which was almost as bad as the West End. Reputation. And I get out of my red, white, and blue VW. You remember that? And here are these two Black Muslim brothers dressed to the nines walking towards me. And honestly, without very friendly looking faces on them, It's like, what's this white boy doing here? And when we got close enough, I looked them in the eye, which you never do, and said, Assalamu alaikum. Man, magic words. And I knew this from being a Baha'i and knowing many Persians and Arabic Baha'is. And it was like to welcome, wa alaikum assalam. And they came up and hugged me. Welcome, brother, welcome. Let us show you through the masjid. And look this is Elijah Muhammad's fez, and introduced me to the teacher and the class. And I mean, just because as a Baha'i, I knew one simple phrase in Arabic. Now they knew I was a Baha'i. They knew I was from Jewish background. I jokingly say, in all sincerity, I was a marshmallow in a sea of raisins. And I've told this story at many Baha'i meetings, and I say, if you want to meet people of a different culture and religion and race than you need to go to them. You see, because they aren't going to come to you. They don't know you.
What a great story, Lloyd. Geez.
Well, thank you.
And all it takes is just a little effort, huh? So, very good. Okay, who's next? Who's got a story?
Well, about the same time that he's talking about the West End, while I was at Georgia State, I got a teaching job at Spelman. So twice a week, I was going to Spelman, and usually my class was starting at about 1 p.m. So I would make sure that I go to cafeteria to eat before the class. And back then, I have forgotten her name. She would forgive me. Bob Henderson's mom.
It's on the tip of my tongue. Yeah.
Firuz Kazemzade's wife.
Yeah.
Wilma was
Wilma Ellis.
yes, Wilma Ellis. Wilma Ellis was she may have been the vice president at Spelman. So I had such an opportunity to most of the time have lunch with her. And in the whole cafeteria, there was one white student, only one white that I could remember. And she was also a Baha'i from Northeast. So we would go to the cafeteria and sit down and eat together. And it was such, a blessing to those times.
I had
Wonderful.
go ahead. Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say I had so many wonderful interactions with Wilma. She was such a not only a brilliant person and a radiant person, but so easy to be with, and and that's those are just lovely qualities, and just had. I'll tell you a story. When she married Firuz, or when she was about to marry Firuz, we were talking one day, Wilma and I, and she said, "Tom, I didn't realize I could be so happy." And it was really, really cute to see this, romance. And I guess she was probably in her 60s or late 50s when she married Firuz. So it was just lovely. Okay. Any other stories to share?
No, did you know Almitra Henderson, who was going to Spelman at that time?
The
She lived
name
in
doesn't
South
ring a bell.
DeKalb.
As a student?
Yes. A young woman, I believe she was living in South DeKalb at the time. She was actually from this area in California, and she went there specifically to go to Spelman.
I don't have any memories of that. She was probably there, but we didn't run across each other.
And just a note for Angela and Carrie, that this area that they're talking about, there's actually 5 Black universities that are in a fairly small area, just east of downtown Atlanta, isn't it? Is it? But it's
next from downtown. You go the next exit west, and they are there off of the I-20.
Yeah.
Good old Lee Street.
Atlanta University, Clark Atlanta, Maurice Brown, Spelman, and one other.
Yeah.
The only students I met was over at Ollie's Trolley.
I remember that.
There was one, just about 2 blocks from school.
That's a hamburger joint. I remember that.
Used to be.
Yeah, a really good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you guys ready to see my silly little stories?
You bet.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let me share screen again. And
that's fine.
All right. Okay. So this is, my little thing is about, it's really my becoming aware of spiritual worlds is what it is. And the first one I have to tell you about, and this is actually the night I become Baha'i. So I'm at a winter school in Alabama, And that gentleman you see there is Stanwood Cobb. And I met, there's a long story, and I'll keep it short, but Dr. Cobb was the keynote sort of speaker. And in the evening, he spoke. And he gave just a brilliant, he was 94 when I met him, and he was speaking there. Later, I invited, when he was 97, I invited him to give a talk at the university I was then at. And he's amazing. But the first time I met him, he had given this talk. It was a fantastic talk. It was animated and spiritual and just all the things that, any good seeker is looking for. But afterwards, there was some people hanging around him. So I thought, well, I'll hang around too, because he's a rather interesting fellow. And at one point, Dr. Cobb was reading poems. Well, Baha'is don't generally read people's palms, but he was. And so after he was reading a few poems, I decided I would get brave and stick my hand out and let him read it. And so he did. He says, "Oh, that's interesting." He says, "You're a very creative fellow, but you get depressed a lot, don't you?" And I said, well, I don't know about the creative part, but yeah, I suppose you could say that there's some depression, and I sort of wishy-washied about it. The truth is that I had been in serious therapy I had a rough childhood for a number of years, and I was in 2 therapy sessions a week, sometimes 3, just to avoid suicide, frankly, because I was really depressed and struggling. And so Dr. Cobb was holding onto my hand, and I told you what I had said. And he said, I used to get depressed also. And he says, and Dr. Cobb had met Abdu'l-Baha, and he was with Abdu'l-Baha, and he says he was lying in his room in the afternoon sleeping, as depressed people are often to do. And Abdu'l-Baha suddenly came into his room, and I think he was in Egypt at that point, either Egypt or Haifa, I'm not quite sure which. Cobb lived all over the Middle East, but especially in Beirut mostly. Abdu'l-Baha comes into the room, walks over, grabs Dr. Cobb's hand, who's on his cot, holds it to his chest for a bit, and then throws it back and says in English to him, "There, you won't be depressed anymore," and laughs and leaves the room. And Dr. Cobb said, "Well, and I haven't been depressed anymore." And that was like, 70 years later or something like that. And then at this point, Dr. Cobb gives me my hand back, which had been a bit uncomfortable, but okay. And I said, "Oh, that's a very interesting story." And then I left. And then actually the next day is when I signed my card to become a Baha'i. In large part because of Dr. Cobb, but also because of the quality of the Atlanta Baha'is. And then I went back to Atlanta, and about a week passed, and I went to my therapy groups and stuff like that. But then after about a week, I noticed that I wasn't depressed. And then after about 2 weeks, which was odd for me, I said, "Well, I'm still not depressed." And so to make a long story short, it turns out that Dr. Cobb had cured my depression as well. And this would have been a very deep, very concerning depression. And it happened in a truly miraculous way. So that's my first miracle story that I have to tell you. And the reason I share these things is that people that don't understand the spiritual powers of the faith really don't understand the faith. And so that's why I think it's important to share these things. Shortly after,
that's amazing.
This story here should be, so I'm reading the Baha'i writings, and at one point, and I'm in my little room near Little 5 Points, and the Atlanta people will know this. I have a little bitty room with a bunch of roommates, and I'm reading from the writings, and I don't know what it is that I'm reading. And at some point, I begin to sense in the evening a continuing sort of presence in my room. Now, keep in mind, I'm new, I grew up with the Bible, but I'm new to spiritual experiences. Um, and the first time I ignored it, but I would go to my room and I would read the writings at night, and then the whole room sort of would get filled up with some sense of presence that was very new to me. And this would continue and continue, and I don't know what the heck it was, but the Baha'i writings do talk about angels that can visit you. And whatever that was, whether it's my imagination or not, I certainly didn't intend to conceive it, but it did help me become aware of sort of spiritual forces. And so that was sort of it. I could make out the sense of it. It was a little more cloudy than this, but it really felt like a being, a very benevolent, wise, noble sort of being there. So I told you that I was in a therapy group, and I continued. I was in several. I was in personal therapy twice a week, and then group therapy once a week. And I suddenly realized that I began to know more and have more insight than the therapist that was running the thing. And it's because of the sort of inner revolution that was happening with me and the Baha'i Faith. So I was able to save a few people from the therapist, frankly. and then shortly thereafter sort of left the group. But it turns out that Baha'u'llah is a pretty good therapist. So,
Yeah.
and then the first person I taught, and those my Atlanta friends will recognize, that's Gary McDaniel on the right.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I'd been a Baha'i for maybe a month, 2 months, something like that. And Gary had just come back from the military and discovered in the back of my car a Baha'i book. Well, I didn't think Gary was a very spiritual guy. Back in the old days, he was in fact the drug dealer of the friends I hung out with, the older friends I hung out with. And we're not talking serious drugs, we're talking marijuana largely. But Gary was the supplier. and he had gone off to the military, and I just didn't think Gary was very interested. So I had not mentioned the faith to him. But he asked if he could borrow the book, and then he asked if he could go to a Baha'i meeting. And I said, yeah. And so I took him to a Baha'i meeting, and darn if Gary didn't become, this was at Carrie and Murph's fireside. And darn if Gary didn't become extremely excited and highly just awakened and became a Baha'i at the first meeting.
Oh my.
I had studied the faith for a year before I went to that school, that Baha'i school that I told you about. But when Gary woke up from the faith, or to the faith, that began to show me, oh my goodness, this is more than just, academic. And it wasn't an isolated event, this thing that happened to me in therapy. It is in fact a living faith, and it is extremely powerful to turn people around. So that was a significant event for me. And about that same time, that's me, Lloyd. That's sort of what I used to look like. You may remember. I don't know what happened, but I was going to Georgia State, and that's John McGempsey, who I taught the faith to. That's behind this. And then the other lady, well, you don't know the other lady, so I won't tell you that story. But about this time that I had this experience with Gary, I became extremely enkindled. And, perhaps you can see it in the picture, but I was a fireball. And I got so excited with what I had bumped into that for 3 days, I could not sleep. I was just running on incredible energy. And during that time, I swear, if a miracle had been necessary, I was convinced I could have done it. I was living in a different world, in a different plane. I was teaching people left and right at the university. I was just in another world altogether. But after 3 days, of not sleeping, not being able to sleep. I mean, I would lie down, but there was the thoughts and the energy was just too great. I became worried and said and felt I can't handle this anymore. And so I prayed to, please let me, just let me sleep. I give up. You're more powerful than I. And thankfully I was finally able to go to sleep. But it was a true, awakening. It was a real energizing thing. And then that's me on the right and Bob Hannavold on the left, who many of you guys
Remember
may
Bomb?
remember.
And
At one
Wendy, yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
at one point, we had a friend, not a Baha'i, who had attempted suicide by burning himself. His wife or girlfriend, I can't remember which, was unfaithful, and so he doused himself with
Oh God.
gasoline and lit it.
Oh.
So he went off to the hospital, and I learned of it. And then Bob, I don't know if Bob knew him or not, but Bob and I climbed Stone Mountain for dawn prayers. And we must have said prayers for about an hour or so, just intense, praying for this friend of ours. And when at some point, the sort of spiritual atmosphere sort of changed. And I went down the mountain and then called the hospital. And they said in the last hour, his condition had been upgraded and they think he was going to live. And I have no clue
Wow.
if this had anything to do with us. But I wouldn't deny that it's possible. But it did teach me about the power of prayer, and it's much more than, just words and sounds, as we know.
Wow.
This picture is to remind me of a story. Do you remember, you guys, Joy Parker's sister? I forget her name. Does anyone remember? This story comes from, this is a story I heard from Joy and from her sister. These are Atlanta Baha'is, that she had a dream, and in this dream, this character appears, that she had never seen. It was a character with a turban, and then the next day, she was walking down the street, and this was what area? This is Midtown. Of course, Midtown then didn't look like Midtown now in Atlanta. She walks by a store, and I think she said it was either a card shop or like an antique store, not a fancy store. And the owner had put a picture of Abdul Baha in the window because she liked the picture. And this lady, this friend of ours, walked by and realized that was the person who had visited her in the dream that night. And so she went in the store and asked who it was. And that led to the lady said she just liked the picture and that she knew about it through some Baha'is, and they looked up Baha'is. And then that's how the Parkers initially became Baha'i, at least Joy and her
Wow.
sister. And then Stephen had become Baha'i. So, but that was it. Also about this same time, this is a room at Llewellyn. I began to become aware, and those of you that know Llewellyn, Abdul Baha had a room in Llewellyn, and I was visiting that room. But there was just an intense presence in it that I could feel. It's not unlike the presence that you would feel if you go to Baji or, something like that. But I began to become aware that I could sense the vibrations that were left in a room where prayer had been said. And so this was a new discovery for me, to become aware of those sort of things. And then this started a bunch of travel teaching adventures, because at this point I knew, I knew enough of the faith and was certainly animated enough, and began taking travel teaching trips. One of the first big ones outside of Georgia was to the Grand Bahama, which is an island, one of the Bahama islands. And that building on the right is a little shack that we stayed in. And we, by the way, was Ken Bowers, who's younger than myself, and his brother, Ken's brother is
Ford.
Ford, yes. And
Ford.
Yeah, Ford, and then two others, I think. And we were crammed into this shack, and there's two rooms in this shack, and we were all in the front rooms where we all slept. I forget what was the back was a sort of a kitchen. And then the people that dropped us off there clearly didn't know much about the island, because there's nothing on this island except a fancy hotel that was about a mile down the road to the right. But if you looked out our window, that's our window to the left, and that's the ocean there. Um, but I have some very cute Ken Bauer stories from those days, and Ken was, and I'll tell you this story. Because you'll get a kick out of it. Ken is a big shot in the. Ken's a very sweet man, but he's a chair. He's secretary of the Assembly, National Assembly. But Ken used to give the worst firesides I'd ever heard, and I was the elder in this particular thing, so I was the leader of the expedition. So when Ken would come up to someone and want to share the faith, and there weren't many people around in this part of the island, but he would begin like this. In 1844, a young man arose. And then he would go on about Mullah Hussein and this and that and the other. The people have no clue what the hell he was talking about. And he sounded like a tape recorder every time he did it. And I was trying to teach Ken, you have to find out what they're interested in first. And so, at any rate, but that was one of my first teaching trips. And then I went to Guyana, which is in South America. This is our group of travel teachers that came from different places, and about maybe a fourth of those, 2 or 3 of those people are Guyanese, and the rest are people that were visiting Guyana to help teach the faith. The faith was growing pretty fast in Guyana, and so that's why was it. And then my little unit from that was this. That guy is me, and then this is a local Guyanese. These are local Guyanese. Not sure about him, but these were travel teachers here, and then it might have been just the 3 of us here. Yeah, and this was a house. The house were on stilts back then, and so we would go through this is underneath the house where we were sleeping, and there were so many mosquitoes. If you didn't have a mosquito net, you'd be in big trouble. So the sleeping accommodation was not great, but we would walk out during the day, and I'll let you look at this first. During the day, we would walk out and we would simply invite people to a meeting to learn about the Baha'i Faith. And then every night we would have that meeting, and then one of us, the 3 who I just showed you, would usually talk about it. And every night about 100 people would come. And this, for Americans, this is unheard of. It would be it'd be between 60 and 100, but a lot of people would come, and then we would talk about the faith. And this is a quote that says that those that make mention of the name of the Lord, the host of divine inspiration will descend upon them, and then he'll get a chalice of pure light, etc. So this is sort of a preface to what happened to me. Every night about 60 to 100 people would come. This was in the evening, of course, and one of the 3 of us would usually talk. And every night about 10 people would become Baha'i. And so we stayed around for about 10 days, and then we formed an assembly, which was pretty amazing. There was over 100 Baha'is by the time we left. But one evening, there were a couple of teenage troublemakers that had showed up, and they were intent on causing trouble. And so I went to sort of intercept them at one point. And I'm a, skinny little 20-year-old something, just a few years older than these 3 kids were. There's either 3 or 4 of them, I can't remember. But I came and they were being disruptive, and I needed to silence them. I have never done such a thing in my life, and I can't even remember what I said or did, but I suddenly became possessed of some tremendous power that caused me to say things that I could never say, nor could I remember. But whatever it was that I said, it dissipated the crowd. They left. Those troublemakers left. And then afterwards, I stumbled off into a field of, I think it was corn or wheat or some high grass. And the experience that I had had of what had just happened to me was so powerful that I literally fell to the ground and shook for a bit. Um, and it strikes me that these things that I had heard of, if you've ever read the book of Acts in the Bible, there's all sorts of stories of these near miraculous sort of happenings, often portrayed as miracles, frankly. But those were just stories and far-fetched to me. But when I started experiencing these things, I realized that, my God, these are, there's real things happening here. Spiritual powers are very intense. So I thought I would share that with you. But probably the most dramatic story that came from the Amazon, the Amazon runs through Guyana, is that this person on the left, that Shore was in one of the other groups. And after we finished our individual teaching efforts in different communities, we would come, the travel teachers would gather together and we'd talk and share stories. Shore and her team, which was 2 or 3 others, went up the Amazon to a village that was only accessible by boat. When they went up the Amazon, when they approached the village that they intended to approach, there was a large gathering of people out in front near the dock. And the head man of the village was standing in front, and he came up to the boat. And so the boat driver and the Baha'is asked, well, what was going on? And the head man of the village said the following. He said that last night he had had a dream that some foreigners were going to come and deliver a great message, and they were here to receive it. Wow. That blew me away. And that's the book of Acts sort of stuff. And this is not something that I read or heard. This is something that this person who is in this type of boat, this is just a clipped picture of the Amazon. She told me this, and she is not a liar. But it gave me some sense of the power and how God works. So in Guyana, a bunch of these little these were houses that became Baha'i centers, started popping up all over, and it was really a very exciting sort of time. And then I went to Africa. And there's many stories I can tell you about Africa because I was there in a village for 5 years. But there's one that's relevant to our theme here. This fellow here is named Ray Sams. So, and I'm going to tell you this story simply because it illustrates a little bit how pure-hearted people experience faith. I was once talking at some group, and we were talking about miracles or something like that. And I'm not in the habit of talking a lot about miracles. But at this point, Ray Sams said, Ray means Mr. Sam said, well, you've worked miracles here. And I said, what? And he says, yes, you cured my feet. And I said, Ray Sams, what are you talking about? And he said, yes, before you had come and I had joined this faith, these are all Baha'is in this picture, I had terrible feet and now they're cured. Well, I have no idea if this is true. I know nothing about it, but I can tell you that the people of Africa, village people, are very pure-hearted. And a lot of the stories, no doubt, that were related of miracles in other religions are probably of this genre. They're little stories that pure-hearted people will relate and others relay and perhaps add on to. So it helps me understand. But it's not to dismiss the reality of miracles. In fact, I think I have here. This, I'll just share these couple of things. We're getting near the end here. Should we seek or believe in spiritual powers? And this is a quote from the writing. It says, strain every nerve to acquire both inner, that's really what we're talking about, and outer perfections. And then so much as capacity and capability allow, ye needs must deck the tree of the being with fruits such as knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual perception. And I think what happened as I was becoming Baha'i and having these experiences is that my spiritual perception was, I was waking up spiritually. I think Christians would probably say you were born again, is maybe this sort of thing. But that's part of it. Baha'is could get in trouble if we talk a lot about, these mysterious sort of forces that are operating. But we're not shamans, and we don't make a show of religion. That's sort of a show of religion there. So we're very much along the lines of what the Gospel of Matthew talks about, not to practice righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. And the same sort of things go here. And don't keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of many words, but to pray sort of in quiet. So Baha'is, thankfully, are very reserved and quiet, and there's sort of a dignity associated with that. But that doesn't mean that we don't believe in miracles. And you only have to read the 7 valleys and get especially to the later valleys, where this is the Valley of Wonderment here, where it says that every moment the seeker in that beholds a new creation. Things are being created, all that, and goes from astonishment to astonishment, and is lost before them in the handiwork of the sovereign Lord of all. So I really think it's important to people that are, and I think it's the only way to understand our faith, is that when you begin to touch the infinite, then miracles are always near. Those miracles may be, very subtle, but they're nevertheless miraculous goings on, and they're constant. And that's sort of, I think, the take-home message that I was hoping to share with youth. And in my experience, all these confirmations only happened in the field of service. So you have to be engaged in the teaching work, or these things don't happen. But I've been, blessed in my life, so I thought I would share those stories, and so there they are. Very good. Good.
Wonderful.
Wow. What can be said?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll share a story. I don't know how many of you know of anybody that's ever left the faith. And have you ever known anybody that left the faith that then came back?
Yes, and I think I know where you're going with this, Louis.
I'm one of those.
I know.
You have to be careful what you ask for in this faith.
There you go.
Because it will take you to some strange places.
Yes.
I have read a lot about the Holy Spirit, and to be very frank and honest, I have found that, I have read that in feast, the Holy Spirit is supposed to descend upon the feast. So I went looking for the Holy Spirit. And I will tell you, this lady here, my wife, is a very patient, understanding person, because I put her through a lot of turmoil. But I ended up going to a church, in a very interesting church that was held in a converted art theater. It was a porno theater. And the denomination was the First Church of God in Christ. And for anybody that knows, that's one of the largest Black denominations in the United States. I get drawn all kinds of places. And so I went there looking for the Holy Spirit. And on a New Year's Eve, I answered the altar call. I was a Baha'i. And I will tell you, Pastor Gridiron put a little olive oil on his hand and barely touched me, and it knocked me back a couple of feet. And I was never the same, was I, Boo Boo? I got baptized, and this traveling minister I had been having conversations with for years was in town, and I wanted him to baptize me. So we were over at another friend's mobile home, and they had this beautiful swimming pool, and that's where I was going to be. Now, understand, I'm still a Baha'i. And as we're getting into our swimming trunks, he says, you know, I believe if there's any time to ask for a spiritual gift, which is why I bring this up, because you were talking about that. He says, I believe that this is the time to ask for one. He says, there's nothing scriptural. He says, it's just a feeling. He says, so if you were to have a spiritual gift, what would you want? And here is where my Baha'i sensibilities come in, because I said, discernment. I want discernment. And he goes, wow, I've never had anybody ask me that before. I said, well, it is one of the gifts of the Spirit, isn't it? He says, oh, yeah. He says, but usually people want tongues, you know, or perform miracles or any of this. He says, but so anyway, I was baptized. I left the faith about a week later because I was having to deal with the resurrection of Jesus. And long story short is, even as a Baha'i, I confess to the resurrection, and I will not discuss whether it's physical, spiritual, or whatever. God doeth what he will. It wasn't the first time dead prophets appeared. It wasn't the last time. So it's not a foundation for me. But what I did learn in my, call it my year of sojourn among the Christians, and I hope this ties in well with what you say, is I started studying about the Apostle Paul. And as a Baha'i, I now believe that he gave us a way to teach. Whenever time he was asked why he believed what he did, you know, like, why are you a Baha'i? Why are you a Christian? You know, you used to persecute him. He said, all I know is I was on the road to Damascus. And I believe that each Baha'i has their road to Damascus.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of debate. It's a matter of experience.
Yeah.
And we're told to relate that's what we're doing. We're relating our roads to Damascus and what happened afterwards. The other thing I learned, and it was in Acts, when Paul was on Mars Hill, you know that story? And there were all these idols, all these statues to all these different gods. And at the far end, there was this one that didn't have anything on it, and there was no name. So he asked all these religious leaders, well, I know you're great spiritual people. Who's that? And they answered, well, in case we forgot one, that's him.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, you know about all these others. Let me tell you about this one. What occurred to me was, he didn't tell them they were wrong about all the other gods. He found a point where he could come to some agreement of understanding about an unknown God and talk to them about that. And it's really influenced me as I became, because a year later I came back to the faith. And as a side, it was interesting how many Baha'is never visited me in that year, but always knew I'd come back.
What an excellent story, Lloyd. Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have to say just a couple of brief observations, and they're not unlike the ones we started off with. Is that I fear, first of all, spiritual experiences are not unique to the Baha'is. They exist. I've heard incredible stories out of Hinduism and not so much in Buddhism, but I haven't known that many Buddhists. But in Christianity, certainly, in Islam, a dime a dozen for such stories in many cases. But that doesn't mean that these spiritual experiences aren't real and very important to us, because we want faith. Faith really has to be mystical. It's not just it's not a philosophy, it's something that is transformative. And that's what we're all looking for. And so and Baha'is are quite capable of getting in trouble by not understanding this and not doing what the writings say. So, I think it's part of our job is to wake ourselves up and to wake others up and to, get about the business of doing what we, are supposed to do while the time we have left. And that's in little part really what spiritual stories is about, which brings me to this next step I need your help with. So hold on just a second. Let me go back to this. Okay. So there's several next steps that we could go. Originally on the thing was pioneering. We could share, pioneering stories, but I may be the only one among us right now with those stories. So
Well, you count home front,
yeah, we could do home fronts sort of stuff.
That's what we did.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we could talk about that, and then or maybe even we could join 7 and 8, because the spiritual challenges topic ought to be quite interesting.
Yes.
And then the next step, the number 9, is really for us, whoever is present, to think about, okay, we've made it through a sequence. Now what do we do? Is sort of,
Yep.
and think about that. So that's sort of where we're going. But what do you think about next time, guys? Should we do 7 and 8? Or is that sort of, does that
Sure.
make sense?
That sounds good.
Yeah. So that ought to be a good thing. Oh, yeah. Oh, Fair Boys, I don't know if you heard, but earlier I was telling them about the stuff on YouTube to find
Yes,
your
yes, I
talks.
heard.
Oh, good.
I heard all of it. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So those of you that haven't seen, in my mind, and I know Fairbours is a little more skeptical of nature than I am, perhaps, because he's a good practical builder, but every one of his talks is just filled with examples of the Holy Spirit and how it has guided his work and miraculous things that happen left and right in the course of what he was doing. So how do they find your YouTube stuff, Fairbours?
I think if you
Just Google it, or
if you look for the storytelling of Mr.
Storytelling
Sahba,
by Faiburs Sahba.
yes, just you type that, it comes.
yeah,
There are many of them in Persian, many of them in English.
Yeah.
So
Storytelling, what else? I'm sorry.
storytelling of Faiburs Sahba
Okay.
or of Mr. Sahba. I think both of them, they are in YouTube.
So my little spiritual experiences are sort of like grade school, but I'm pretty sure Mr. Saba's in universities. So, but they're just wonderful. So
I had the chance to hear his story on the construction of the temple in India. I loved it.
yeah, it's just
And many of those stories are related to India or to Haifa. Yes.
Mm.
One thing, when you were telling at the beginning, there was a reference to Wilma Alice and Kazemzadeh. I'm sure maybe you all know, but that's a very interesting thing for me, that Firuz Kazemzadeh was his father was a real sort of disciple of my grandfather. Because of that, our families were very close. I knew them in Ashgabat. They were in Ashgabat, Russia, and then all of that. One thing very interesting for me was that when Firuz Kazemzadeh met beloved guardian, and they have just left Iran to go to United States for higher education. And he was so really, you know, full of imagination that what they want to do and all of that. Beloved guardian asked him, what do you want to study in United States, in West? He said he's thinking to learn music, study music. Beloved guardian said, you study history. And then he changed his mind, and then he became a very wonderful historian, as you know. That's as simple as that. Just one word, beloved guardian did not say anything about what you want to do. He said, you study history. That's really interesting for me.
And he did such amazing things for us with that position that he had.
Yes.
Was it Princeton where he was in the history, or
No.
Yeah.
I think it was
Yale?
Yale.
Yale it was, yeah.
Yale School of Architecture.
That helped us so much.
And they found, in fact, in Yale library, because of him and because of his interest, there is an enormous collection of the Baha'i original documents that recently was published by Dr. Abbas Amanat, and of course mainly by Mr. Wahman, Feridun Wahman, and they published a book about that. These are all of the documents that are they're very, very interesting. All of the documents of government of Iran about their everything that they were doing to find out about the Baha'is and all of that in the West. It's there, and the book is published. So there is a wealth of really material in that university because of Dr. Kazemzadeh.
Mm. So anything else you guys want to share or talk about? It's so good to see you guys. Oh,
You too, Tom.
Angela, you got to show them your artwork at some point, or tell them your internet thing so they can.
Yeah, I'm working on this piece right now.
Oh, let's see.
There's
Oh my goodness. That is so beautiful. It's really, your stuff is so good. It's just excellent. Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Okay,
yeah,
friends.
and by the way, I didn't sleep for 3 nights also before becoming a Baha'i. 3 nights straight.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing? And did you get scared? I got scared.
Yeah, I was like, what's going on? At the beginning, there was so much energy in me and everywhere. And then it was just like exhausted. I was like, okay, I need to sleep.
Yeah. We are related. Very
I
good.
could ask one weird question.
Yeah.
How many of us were students at Georgia State?
Oh.
Aye.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
4.
Something?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty
You know,
cool.
we have a football team now.
There you go. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's only been 10 years, you know. It's
Yeah. Well, friends, it's so lovely to see you. So I really look forward to seeing you next time. Feel free to invite others. I will have this put up on YouTube and send you all the link. And so if you wanted to share it with others, you could. So
Love that. Thank you.
Thank you
so
Tom.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Next
Bye-bye.
month.